of the fundamental things I like to talk about is what it means to be on the same page. We've talked about some fantastic examples of people getting on the same page and making a difference because of it. How do you define getting people on the same page in the work you do?
I think the definition for me is the destination. Where are we headed? What are we trying to accomplish? I'm a big reader, and I'm a big reader of business books. Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich is one of my all-time favorites. I don't think they use the term laser focus, but to me, it's being laser focused on the result and specifically pinpointing. Not, well, I want to get better. I want the position. I want the company to do better. That's not a
Vague, yeah.
pinpointed result.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very vague. How do we specifically
Yeah.
identify exactly what we want to accomplish? And that to me is the starting spot. Somebody to define exactly where we need to go.
Yeah.
Now, the path in getting there can then be debated and discussed,
Yeah.
but it is very clear we need somebody to show some managerial courage and say we're going to take this to a different destination than where we are today.
And across the big organization, how people get there will vary.
It will, because people are naturally going to look at it from their point of view.
Yeah.
And maybe those things that are important to them, either because of them being rewarded a certain way,
Right.
or just flat out just being part of their day-to-day job responsibilities. Everybody's going to look at it through a different lens. And so to me, it's focusing all the lenses in one spot.
That's a laser. So, what did you see in the psychology of people when they, from the shop floor to men and women in the office, analysts and secretary up to executive positions, what did you see when that the goal was clear, there were some measures that wasn't vague, that was specific, like SMART goals, right?
Right.
Specific, measurable, etc. Sometimes those are daunting and can make somebody kind of pull back and go, "Whoa, can we do it? Can I help with that? I don't even know." What did you see with the psychology of it, especially if, like you said before, there was a small win, and then you get a little bit of a light bulb, or a little dawning of, "Hey, maybe this is possible." And then, did you see an ambitious goal? Did you see an ambitious vision draw people in?
Yes. I'm going to use my current organization. This is a very successful recycling company. We recycle batteries, car batteries, and industrial batteries. The first thing it did was separate them into their three main components of lead-bearing material, sulfuric acid, and plastic. The lead-bearing material gets broken apart, it gets melted, it gets treated, it gets cleaned. We add the chemicals to it and take it to a specification that the customer is looking for, and we ship it back to them. That was the primary business. But then the offshoot became, well, how do we recycle this plastic?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, became one of the world's largest plastic recycling companies.
No kidding. It
Yeah,
was a throwaway before, and now.
Yeah, I mean, they were putting it in a landfill to the point where they're digging out the landfill and pulling the old plastic out of it because that's a free raw material.
Wow.
And sulfuric acid can get neutralized to water, and you can use that water in your processes. Well, that mentality.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah, helped us a number of years ago, because the ambient air levels for lead went from 1.5 units to 0.15 units, so a 10-factor reduction.
Around the plant?
Yes, but the EPA decreed these new ambient air levels, so basically we had to make a 10-fold reduction.
Okay.
We knew we were not going to be able to do that incrementally. Our existing bag houses and technology was not going to allow that to happen. So the decision was made to build a scrubber, basically a large scrubber that, its sole purpose was to take, SO2 out of the atmosphere. And a lot of people just mixed it with different types of material and would consolidate that material and put it into a landfill. our folks ask the question, how do we make it commercially viable?
Yeah.
So we mixed it with anhydrous ammonia, made ammonium sulfate that we now sell as fertilizer. And that helped us to offset the cost. So not only did we comply with the
Mm-hmm.
EPA requirements, but we now have another revenue stream into the business that and now we're saying, geez, what else can we do there? What other waste material or waste products do we have that we could possibly do something similar with?
You
So
turn the scrubber into an investment.
exactly, and that investment may never fully pay back, but you had to put it in place anyway. That
Anyway,
was a
right,
requirement.
right.
That was our proverbial ticket to play. We had to go ahead and do that. But to have the foresight to say, well, I want to offset some of those costs and I want to be able to sell that product and continue my reputation as a recycler,
Yeah,
that takes some interesting thought.
interesting.
Now, I bring this up because this is a 50-plus-year-old company that has been very successful. And to its point, sometimes a victim of its own success because nothing has changed in 45 years in that company. No process has changed, no equipment changes, nothing like that, because we've been very successful the way we do it.
Yeah, right.
Now all of a sudden, we're asking people to change technology, and we've got some new investments that we're going to be making into the company. The owners are very gracious about investing back into the organization, and basically we're investing for the next 15 to 20 years and making technology changes and so forth. A lot more automation,
Interesting.
less
Yeah,
reliance on people.
yeah.
So when you bring people into a room and you say, we're going to make this change, the first response is a little bit of excitement, but then it's like, oh, what does this mean for me?
Right,
What does this mean for my job? Am I going to have to start doing my job differently? Am I
right.
going to have to start using different technology, different software? And you immediately start to paint the worst case scenario picture in their
True.
mind, right?
Common. That's common. True.
Very much so. So part of our job, I think, as senior leadership then is let them get through that process. It's almost like a grieving process. They,
You're
right?
right. You're right.
There's shock. There's
The six
disbelief.
stages.
There is anger. All long before
Denial.
they come to acceptance. Exactly. Uh, but once they reach that point of acceptance, I always feel part of my job is then kind of coming around behind and just sitting down with individuals or even departments or groups of individuals and saying, okay, now let's talk about your specific situation. Let's talk about what needs to change. Let's get very specific. Let's get very laser focused. We're not talking wholesale change. We are talking,
Yeah.
A and B or X and Y or X, Y, and Z now. Let's start putting the plans in place. What needs to happen here? Right? And you start engaging them in the process. And that's when you start to see that aha moment, or okay, I can get on board with this. This isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Well, let me ask you. Let's go back to something you mentioned before, and I'll ask you now. You mentioned motivation. So when you're in that conversation with somebody after they've gone through the Kubler-Ross 6 stages and they're ready to have a conversation, what did you see? Anybody could have any particular motivation, but categorically, what few motivations did you see that you were able to align with and align them with for the business objectives? Get on the same
You know,
page.
yeah, absolutely. I think it starts with the fundamental understanding that we are all human beings and we're all selfish. And so we're all asking, what does this mean to me? So one of my first questions is, what are you afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
What personal fears do you have?
Mm-hmm.
And let's get those on the table. Some people are job scared in terms of, well, does that mean my position is going away?
Sure.
They're thinking about their families. They're
Sure.
thinking about their livelihoods. To me, that's always seems to be the number
Very
one
basic
motivation.
level of
Is
Maslow's hierarchy, right? It's gonna could
exactly.
it hit me there?
Yes. So those fundamentals. Once you get that out of the way, and they realize, oh, I'm going to have a job. Okay, now step number two, how is my job going to change? Are the expectations going to be different? Am I going to be able to change with it?
Mm-hmm.
That's when you can really start having meaningful conversations of individual change, and whether it's personal or professional change that they need to make. Do they need to go back to school? Do they need to learn software? Do they need to learn a new system of managing? Yes, it's going to be different from what you've done before, but here's specifically how. And now is my favorite part of my job is I think you can do this.
Yeah.
And let me motivate you a little bit with how we're going to do it, or some ideas that we're going to do, and they will take that and run with it. And all
Well,
of a
let me
sudden, then
ask
they
you
they take full ownership.
on that point. I don't know your business at all, or your business of HR and health and safety and risk management, or the company's business. But I'm going to bet things I don't want to lose that even a guy who's been doing something one way for 45 years, and you're having a conversation where things are going to change and there will be some new technologies or new processes or new something. There's value in what he knows, or she, value in what they know that they can apply to what is coming. So it isn't as if we really don't need people to repair buggies anymore. It's not like that's gone. You've got knowledge and that you can apply to what we're going to do next that has value. Now, that's got to make somebody feel better and motivated too. But I'm asking you to tell me if that's not right, or tell me if that's you see that happen.
I think it varies.
Okay.
I happen to be in a part of the country where the unemployment is very low, and people normally go to one company and they stay there for 25, 30,
Mm-hmm.
35. Now I've got 50-year employees
Oh wow. Okay.
in my company at this point in time. They are vested. They don't want to change. They don't want to have to go anywhere else and start all over. Where you can go to other parts of the country, and more urban settings, larger
Hmm.
cities, where it's easy to not only maybe change jobs, but heck, you could change careers
Right.
if you wanted to.
Right.
So I think it's really a factor of where you are and what's available around you. So that environmental impact to me is really part and parcel to these conversations.
But if you're sitting with me,
So
Terry, you're sitting with me, and I've been doing something for 30 years, and I know it's going to change, and I don't want to walk away from it, but I don't know how
right,
it's going to go. I don't know if I'm up for it. And you're being honest with me. Look, we might need to get you some training. We might, but isn't it not also not the case that you could say to me, it isn't like I want to wipe the hard drive in your head clean and nothing you've ever done matters anymore. What you know about the company, what you know about processes, what you know about the shift, what you know about people, what you know continues on, maybe in a different configuration with new things. But you're telling me, don't despair. What you
right.
the knowledge and the experience you've built for 3 decades working here still has value.
Yes, absolutely. And if people have spent that much time with you, they know things.
Oh
They
yeah.
know things that you don't, maybe they wouldn't give them credit for knowing, because you just can't be around something for that long and not absorb, some of the
Oh yeah.
business traits and those kinds of things. So yeah, there's absolute, and we try to protect that knowledge wherever we can. I was not a big believer in it before, but when I first went through transformation with the company that I referenced earlier, there was a whole communication that was tied back to basically tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
And tribes would tell stories, and those storytellers were responsible for passing the knowledge down from generation to generation. I wasn't much of a believer in that 20 years ago. But today, wow, I'm collecting stories, I'm passing stories along, I'm making sure somehow those stories get passed along, because it's important to the culture. And those people who have been there 20, 25, 30, 50 years, they're the source of all of
Mm-hmm.
that
They're the
information, all of
elders.
that knowledge,
Yeah.
all of that storage. Yes, they've become the elders in the tribe.
Yeah.
And there's something to it. And that's why we celebrate them, when they hit milestones, and that's why we celebrate them when they decide to leave our organization. It's not just the time that they put in, but it's the value that they've brought. and the knowledge that they've allowed us to share down along the way. So I've become a big fan of storytelling and capturing those types of stories and knowledge to pass along.
Well, I know from discussions we've had before too that I'm going to pick up on something you just said. People who know something really deeply, right? And there's a phrase, they develop an unconscious competence about it. It isn't something that it's in their DNA at some point. Don't have to think about it. They just know they have information about operations that executives might never think to ask, but might have a bearing on margin, might have a bearing on safety, might have a bearing on supply chain, timing of things, delivery of things. Right? It might have a bearing on something. It's just what these guys have done forever, so they know it. And if you're at a distance from it, or if you didn't come out of that place, you might not think to ask. If you have
Yeah,
the right conversation with those folks, it's almost like they say, "Well, why didn't you just ask me?"
exactly. I'll tell you something that I've started doing since last September. Usually 1 or 2 Sundays a month, I'll go into the office early and I will dress out in my finest work blues, my respirator, my hard hat, and I'll just go walk the floor
Mm-hmm.
and in each of the departments. And, I'll stop in and say hello to people and just ask them how they're doing, what they're doing, what's important to them, what are they working on, those kinds of things. And part of my motivation are these stories and the knowledge and I'll jot some notes or take some notes. But what I find, Lou, it's talking to them on their turf, and they are in their comfort zone.
Yeah,
I'm out of mine.
yeah,
If I think if I brought them into my office or I brought them into a conference room, the conversations would not
it'd be
be the
different. Yeah,
same.
you're right.
Yeah, or no, nor is free flowing. They are in their comfort zone. And to your point, when you ask somebody about their job, they want to tell you. They want to brag on what they do. They're proud. Most people are proud of what they do.
Yeah, yeah,
You just got to kind of be determined to dig in and be prepared to go out and meet them on their turf.
yeah. Well, I know that some of how you turned around safety practices on the shop floor some years ago was because you went down and talked to the guys and said, "Why aren't you wearing those goggles? Why aren't you wearing those gloves?" And it wasn't that they didn't want to be safe. It was that I recall. You correct me if I forget misremember this. It was that maybe it slowed them down, or maybe it actually impeded vision. So if it impeded vision, there's a perceptual thing, and maybe the guy saying to himself, "I feel less safe. I know they're protecting my eyes, but I feel less safe if I can't see at the periphery." Or if something slowed them down, and they're being compensated on per piece or per unit basis, per some increment of time per hour per shift, there's a reward system in place to crank out units. And if they get slowed down, they're always going to say, "I can keep my hands safe. I can keep my fingers safe. I can keep my fingers on. I want to get the production." Right? That's that rationale that we tell ourselves. So you learn things by talking to them that then you incorporated into. They sort of led some of the safety practices because they told you what would work and what wouldn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one telling somebody that they have to do something is only half of the ratio. The other half of that equation is they understand the why.
Mm-hmm.
There are competing priorities in a lot of manufacturing jobs that you just
Yeah, yeah,
mentioned,
yeah. You're right.
right? Safety. I want you to work safe, but I also want you to get this X number of parts out the door.
Yeah,
And oh, by the way, I'm going to pay you per piece to do that.
right.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to get creative if I've put these artificial governors in place. That's where the value of those conversations become, and that's where, especially by having a little bit of the ability to manage both the incentive but
Yeah.
also the safety component and making sure that those become complementary and not competing priorities.
Well, you showed that more safety was more productive.
Across the grand scheme, right? The safest way is always going to be the best way because if we have an incident, we have an injury, we're going to shut it down, we're going to investigate it. You're not going to make your numbers for that day or that week or that month because we're putting this pause,
Mm-hmm.
into place.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so they realize there's a slower, steadier pace is better than breakneck speed
Yeah.
with no curbing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
accountability to go along with it.
Well, Terry, time always flies when I talk to you. We've covered a lot of things. Great conversation like we do. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover?
Well, for whatever reason, my new terminology of managerial courage
Mm-hmm.
is an area that I'm kind of focusing on a little bit. Management having the courage to throw out an audacious goal
Mm-hmm.
and not being afraid that it's going to be laughed, out of the boardroom, and a couple people come like, why not me, and why not this, and why can't we accomplish that?
Mm-hmm.
So having the courage to bring those concepts up has kind of become a new focal point for me. But we talked about commitment, we talked about communications, we talked about accountability. I talked a little bit about those small successes leading to larger successes. So no, I feel like we've hit on a lot.
I did hear you mention the managerial courage a few times, and then now I just jotted down a couple of things you said that I think are really important for changing conversations. What if, or why
Yeah.
not? Or
Yes.
you didn't say this, but what I've heard you do sometimes, the way I think of some things I've heard you say is you were figuring out ways to. So there's always trade-offs in things that we do. You were figuring out ways to help people achieve an upside to change, an upside to something, while protecting against the downside. The downside might have been personal. Will I lose my job? The downside might have been a misunderstanding they had about what it would do to productivity or what it would do to costs. Right. So you were giving people a sometimes I thought solid place to stand on that maybe they didn't think was so solid. Well, they reached for that thing that maybe the boss said, "Let's try to accomplish this. Tell me
Right.
how." And in the conversations about how, it seemed like there were a lot of roadblocks or hurdles or what would go wrong, and you reframed it sometimes to say, "What if we think of it this way? Is this reasonable? Would this work? Think of it like this. Remove an assumption here, test an assumption, remove it, remove the biases. We all have biases. Our brains work that way. Clear those up so people are going, okay, now if that's how we run that shift, or if that's how we run that equipment, or if that's how we, hey, then somebody might say, not to you, because maybe someone says to a foreman, hey, can we change the way we're receiving some things? Can we change locations where we put some things, right? Then they get creative with problem solving
Yes.
because they're connecting the puzzle pieces or the dominoes, means and ends, means and ends, means and ends, and they're figuring out if we make some changes that nobody was thinking of, actually we could accomplish what we're being asked to accomplish.
Yeah. That to me is those incremental changes, continuous
Yeah,
improvement. That you want that front line. I personally want them to own that.
yeah, right.
I think that is that should become part and parcel to the tactical applications that they're used to doing every single day. And then leave the larger strategical mindset, the what factoring in competitive landscape, financial landscape,
Right, right.
political landscape,
All
etc.
that, yeah.
And now, yeah, and now start to think about, okay, what's the art of the possible? Well, some people use blue
Yeah,
ocean
yeah, yeah, yeah.
approach. So that to me, that's where I want to spend a lot more of my time. And I've got a select group of folks, some of which are senior managers and some of which are middle managers. But when I've got these ideas, I will bring 3 or 4 people together and we'll just sit. Normally, every Friday morning at 9 a.m., I will have the same group of people in my office. They've got their coffee, they got their biscuits, and we just sit and talk
Talk.
about what's possible.
That's cool.
And to your point, people will always shoot down the concepts. Well, that's not possible. Why? That's not possible. Why? That won't work. This won't work. But we start to peel those layers away and
Right,
say, how are we going to make it work? What
right.
needs to happen in order for it to be successful? When you start thinking that way, you'd be surprised
Yeah.
that nothing is
It
impossible.
opens up, yeah.
It really does, because you just remove the excuses. To me, it's just excuses. It's just noise. If you have that laser focus, you have that determination that Napoleon Hill talked about in Think and Grow Rich, there are no excuses. There is no bridge back. It is
Yeah.
only moving the organization and moving it forward.
Under a different set of circumstances, those might have been legitimate. There could be excuses today. Under circumstances, maybe a year ago, 10 years ago, there might have been a legitimate reason why the answer. There might have been a valid reason why that was the.
Mm-hmm.
So if what you're hearing that today, and it's maybe time to challenge that, you've probably seen this happen. If someone says we can't because, and you're going to say, well, what if? Sometimes management's got to come in to remove some barriers to make some changes that the guys on the shop floor could say, well, if you could change schedules or the incentive a package, or if you could do something from your on your side of this equation, I used that phrase before, I like that, then that would enable us to do some things that we have thought we couldn't do.
Right.
And there's a like a dance there between leadership and the guys that are doing the work to get it done.
Whereas somebody that I use as an example, and I'm certainly not bringing his name up to offend anybody, because I find him to be a very polarizing person. But if you look at what Elon Musk has done in terms of automotive and space travel, I'm just going to limit it to just those two things. Yes, there was always talk for at least the last 20 or 30 years about electric vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
but for somebody to commercialize it and basically make a successful business out of it took somebody to say, I'm not accepting the excuses.
Yeah.
I'm not accepting the rationale. We
Yeah.
need to look at this differently.
Right.
To not just say, I'm going to let a rocket drop into the ocean, but instead I'm going to land it on a ship, because I want to reuse that again, because it's costly and inefficient to do it another way. And the only answer is, this is how it's going to work, and I'm going to fund it until we get to that point. That to me is somebody that is
That's
very
cool.
committed to their cause.
Well, it's a good point, and we could end on that. And here's the thought you made me think, which is, we both remember when we were kids, the early moon launches.
Yes.
And what those men and women at NASA were trying to do was figure out how to get human beings out there and back safely. And if they dropped that capsule in the water, they left things in space. They dropped the capsule on the water. Those were not the problems they were trying to solve at that time.
Right.
They were trying to get human beings on a candle out into outer space and back safely, and they did.
Yes.
So
And I was going to say, and think about, there's been plenty of movies now about the behind the scenes and what it really took in
yeah,
the mathematical
yeah,
calculations of it. But you always hit on one key word, right? Safely.
yeah,
Right?
right,
They had to do.
right,
It wasn't a matter of just putting them up there and
right.
leaving them up there. They had to get up there, do what they need to do, and get
Get
back
back.
safely. And so, yeah, I just like to bring it full circle that safety is never far from what we're
No,
really
you're
trying
right.
to accomplish.
But I
Right?
like your point too, because now today Elon Musk is saying, okay, we got that part. We know how to do that. Now let's do more.
Yes.
Let's
And
let's reuse parts. Let's land on it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, how do we keep pushing the envelope? How do we become more efficient in doing that, and therefore make it less costly? And if somebody's going to commercialize space travel, there's no doubt in my mind that's going to be the guy to do it.
Why not us, right?
Yeah,
I
exactly right.
I made a note to myself as we were talking. I would have mentioned this to you. You, along with managerial courage, I wonder if there's a complementary concept. I think with managerial courage, you're thinking more senior, right?
Yeah, or it could be lower level, but yeah,
That's what I
from
was
what
gonna.
I've seen,
Yeah.
I've seen it mostly from senior, because the senior management is the one that's going to probably take you in a different direction that you had not thought about.
Well, I know that you have worked with so many men and women from the shop floor to the boardroom. It might be worth thinking about the courage that a team lead at that level needs to have, right? Like a managerial courage of a team lead to say, to bring something up. because there's courage it takes to do that, because you might feel like you're at risk for something. But hey, Terry, or hey, boss, Tina and I have been discussing this idea. I want to brief you on it. Right? There's some courage it takes to do that.
Yes. Do you know that we recently instituted training within industry? And I think you and I had this conversation before. Training within industry was developed back in World War II, and it was as companies were going from making milk jugs to making bullets, or from making cars to making tanks. The government had a very prudent way that they wanted them to make those adjustments and make those changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they identified, certain methodologies, and safety and communications and training were all a part of it. Part of it then was also continuous improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And that continuous improvement was in the form of suggestions and the old suggestion boxes. When we do that training now, we ask them at the end of it, based on all your learnings, we want you to make one suggestion for change, and then vote on it amongst your team, and then we want a full-blown presentation out of it.
Wow, that's cool.
Lou, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of over 300 projects that we are, in various stages of implementing and doing.
Wow.
That are all just continuous. Hey, put this door here instead of over here. It's going to save me 25 steps.
Yeah.
Hey, put this, relocate this, change this. Things, to your point earlier on, that nobody would have thought of until you asked them.
Yeah.
And then at that point in time,
Yeah.
they're all showing that courage.
That's cool.
To bring those suggestions up and to ask, the company to fund their plan and fund their project.
Well, that shows commitment from the top and the bottom. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
Wow. Well, let's end on that note. I love that. That's the high note. Man, I always enjoy our conversations. Thanks, Terry.
Lou, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation as well. And man, just let me know. I'll be welcome to come back anytime.
I always enjoy talking to you and learn a lot. I made a lot of notes here, things I could steal. Thank you.
I'm glad that was. I'm glad it was beneficial for you. I hope you're able to commercialize it. So, but thank you so much for having me and for even asking me. I'm humbled
Absolutely.
by your ask.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. All right, have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Terry. Bye-bye. And that's how we see it, my friends. I want to thank Terry for recording today's episode. You can find it at iseewhatyoumean.castos.com, plus all the usual places. Send questions and suggestions through an app. Subscribe and give me a 5-star rating unless you can't, in which case tell me why. And join me next week when we take another look at how to get on the same page and stay there, unless we shouldn't.